Hello and welcome to my tutorial and welcome to my channel if you followed me from YouTube. I have painted this landscape in gouache today. Absolutely gorgeous textures. I've added several layers here and I just love the way the moonlight catches against the trees. I'm really pleased with this. I did make a few mistakes whilst painting this painting and I will show you how I corrected those, and I did make a few slight changes closer to the end. So the pad that I'm using for my gouache painting is the Artie's 76-page watercolour book, and this is suitable for mixture of medium, watercolour and gouache. It's cold pressed paper, so it's got a lovely smooth texture. It's double-sided, which I love because I hate waste, so I really enjoy, once I've filled up the book, I'll probably go back and paint on the other side. And it is acid free as well. This particular book that I'm using, I'm going to use solely for my gouache paints, and we'll be covering tutorials in watercolour as well. And what I do is I basically just corner this off with my washi tape to protect the edges and keep the paper straight, but I also use a crocodile clip as well to keep the pages all smooth and level. Again, if you want to know the size of this, it's 8.3 inches by 5.1 inches, so that's 21 centimeters by 13 centimeters, and it's the premium watercolor book with 76 pages in there. I found it to be quite lovely. It doesn't buckle and it holds the water really well. So what I'm doing here is creating a very dark, moody sky, and I want to try and create an illusion that the sky around the moon is also kind of like a halo effect around the moonlight, that's making the sky around the moon slightly lighter than the rest of the sky. First of all, what I wanted to do is actually create a very dark sky and using my darker textures. Later on I will actually add a slightly darker tone to the sky, and it's kind of like a midnight blue, bit black, a tiny bit of black in there to create a more of a moodier texture, which I will actually blend out. At the moment it's looking quite messy, but we will actually blend this up together, and it will actually create a nice kind of like transition from the light of the moon to the darker sky. This is actually, I found this incredibly therapeutic, just to create this kind of whirlpool around the sky. So now I'm just trying to finish off and the skyline where I expect the sky to finish and the trees to meet. And at the moment you can see there's actually a clearly defined line between the light blue that I chose for the rings around the moon to the darker sky, but we will be blending those out to create a better, cleaner transition there. So it's very possible to blend gouache and create those lovely textures and those lovely effects. So I've added a bit more white to the blue paint, the slightly lighter blue paint, just to create kind of like those rings, those halos that you might see in the night sky when you're looking up at the moon. and there you go. I'm trying, what I'm doing now is actually blend the colours and to slightly create rings in the sky that are a reflection of the moon. I did think about creating a few clouds when I did this, but I wanted to have the effect of the moonlight and the rings around the moon instead. I found this bit actually quite therapeutic because you can see that my hands are going quite lovely in circles and creating lovely rings around the skyline. So if you do choose to paint along with me, please share your work. I'd absolutely love to look at the work, and if you do want any feedback, more than happy to create feedback. It's a safe area. I'm on a creative journey myself, so there's no no criticism. It's all positive feedback. And I want to create a nice positive community of people sharing their work, enjoying the journey and creating bonds. So hopefully you'll be enthusiastic as I am. Gouache is such a lovely medium to paint with. It can be slightly intimidating in the first when you're not quite sure, especially from like myself. I came from painting with watercolour. So with watercolour you actually start from your lighter colours down all the way up to your darker colours. So actually remembering that can be fun to begin with. So feel free to make mistakes as well, because as you'll see in a moment, I do make a few mistakes with the sky. I believe a little bit of water actually catched on and I needed to repaint the sky after I made a few mistakes with the raindrops as well. However, it's more than possible. All you need to do is let the paint dry and then you can just add another layer. So what I'm doing now is I'm going through the layers of my tree line, and I wanted to create a very dark sort of blacky green, and that will be the deepest tones, almost unrecognizable, noticeable in the night sky. And you can create some beautiful shadows. So what I'm doing first is creating the very base layer here. So it's a bit of an ugly process right now, but as you've seen in the video, or the first part of the video, it's the beginning layer and you can create some really lovely textures. All you need to do is be patient and you paint your layers, let them dry one after the other, and you can possibly blend those textures together as well. So I'm using slightly wider brush now, just to create a bit of texture here. Later on I will be using my very, very fine brushes to create lovely detail. So what I wanted to do here, I don't know if you can actually see on the camera, but I'm also kind of creating sort of like the backlit of the twigs and the branches that will be poking out over the night sky. And those I will actually make sure that I still allow those to poke through when I create my other layers, because I want to create that level of depth with this painting. So I've let that dry and I've added a slightly more sticky out branch, a technical term for that, sticky out branch, on the side, just to create a bit more interest with that there. Now with the first mistake that I actually made is not paying attention to how the blue sky had dried while I was painting this. So you can see that the layers of the moonlight hadn't quite blended together, but that is completely something that you can fix, and so I actually will be painting over those later on. So here I'm just mixing a few different colours together to prepare for my different layers of paint. So what I want to do now is let this dry slightly. The paint that I've used, I want to use a slightly lighter colour, and what I did with that is just add in a little bit of tiny bit of white, but also a bit of a creamier green, darker green for that, so you can still get the depth and it's not gone too light too soon. You don't want to create too much of a contrast with that, so you want to slowly build those layers up, and you may not be able to see straight away with the camera the type of textures I'm creating. So what I'm doing here is slightly just creating leaf shapes, small and delicate leaf shapes that will be poking through the canopy and poking through the first layer. I'm not going to cover the whole of the base layer, because I still want to see the base layer through the top layers. So I just want your eye to be taken right through from the very light colours right down to the darker colours, because the darker colours are important and it will create that layers or that illusion of texture and depth with that. So I'm delicately creating slight leaf marks, and with this, because it is quite small and it's a lovely brush, all I'm simply doing is placing the edge of my brush around the painting and in different strokes to create a different leaf formation. So it's very easy, very easy for you to do this. So what you should now be able to see, now the paint is slightly dried, is the actual layers. I can now see that through the camera, so hopefully you can actually see that through your camera. I have now gone through a slightly lighter shade of the green, again just slowly mixing lighter colours with the original colour that I had used. So I'm creating a nice deep tone there, so you can actually see that now creating that those layers there with the different tones. I'm going slightly smaller with these leaves. If you may have noticed, I've switched my brush there, so I'm going through a slightly smaller leaves, and I'm not just leaving the leaves on this level of the tree. I'm also every now and again I will actually go down slightly on the page and create another layer there with the paint, so it gives the illusion that the light is catching on the slightly lower branches as well, and create it so you get a slightly lighter shade of leaf. As you can see, I've gone through slightly lighter shades of green, now slowly adding lighter paint to create more texture. And what I'm doing with my brush here is sort of creating a 3-leaf stroke there, and then changing the direction, and just using the tips of my brush and pressing the tip of my brush against the paper, so you get that lovely leaf shape. So I'm just going through again down at the bottom, just to create the illusion that some of the branches are poking out through the canopy, and the moonlight is dancing and creating that lovely contrast with the painting. At this stage, we can't fully appreciate the final result, but I'm hoping that you are seeing a difference in the tones there. And again, this is so beautifully relaxing. Pour yourself a cup of tea and enjoy the process, and just take your time. There is absolutely no rush in creating this work. This painting took me over an hour to complete, and it was no time at all for me. It felt really relaxing. Had a little bit of music playing, and I just enjoyed the day. So now I'm actually again just creating slightly leaves again that's sticking out into the night sky, just because you don't want to have that create that blocky feel. You want to have a few random leaves that are poking out through the night sky, catching against the blueness of the sky there. completed that layer there, and I hope you can actually now see lower in the page where we actually began our base layer, and then we slowly started to build that up again with the different layers. Now this layer is going to be a little bit much lighter than the original layers, because I now want to kind of create the beginnings of the moon catching against the tree line. I still want to see the darkness and the depth of the tree, so I'm not going to create just lines of the tree line that's highlighted. I want to sort of create kind of like the kind of the curve of the branches there, and again I will be actually going down into the lower layers of the canopy and creating that kind of like texture there. So this paint as you can see is much lighter, it's nice and creamy, it's beautiful, and as soon as the paint hit the paper, it was just such a pleasure to see it form the layers of the trees and the peeping of the darker layers through there. So again, the trees aren't in a straight line, so there's no right or wrong, but what you want to do is kind of create slightly the field of branches slightly out, poking out from the rest of the tree. You don't want to create straight lines, but you don't want to create too much of a pattern, because trees are not all the same, and you want to kind of like just enjoy this. If you do have a tree that's in front of you, so you can actually take note of the shades and the different layers and the textures of the trees, you'll be able to get a more realistic overview of what a tree will look like when the light actually hits that. So again here, as you can see, the layers again coming lighter. The leaves are almost sort of a greeny yellow, and now you just kind of want to have the light dance on the edges of the leaves there, and you can see it's so rewarding once you start playing and you create those textures. Absolutely lovely. So you don't want to do this on the whole layers. You kind of just want to sort of highlight the layers that you want to potentially peep out even further of the canopy. And obviously the moon is going to hit those leaves before the rest of the canopy. So again, you want to kind of focus the lighter shades of green right on the tops of the leaves rather than underneath the leaves, to create a bit more of a contrast, a bit more of a shadow. And even though that these leaves are slightly lower than the rest of the canopy, sort of again do want to sort of play with the illusion that these are sticking out slightly for the rest of the tree line, and the moon is hitting against these leaves, which it's really lovely to see. I wanted to create a bit more of a depth, so here you can see I'm sort of like bridging the tree canopies against the the shadows, because I felt it was a little bit too uniformed and I didn't want it to be too uniformed. So I'm actually creating a bit more of a gap, a bit more of a contrast with the leaves going down onto the next layer of the tree line there, and I think that works quite well. Before it looked a bit too uniformed, and I didn't want to have it looking too robotic. this is the top layer, and I've added quite a lot of white to this. So I've used a little bit of green, a tiny bit of yellow and white to this layer, because I really want to create a lovely bright texture, and I'm using this on the very tops of the leaves, so you can appreciate the layers and the light bouncing off the canopy. Again, I'm not keeping it right on the top. I will be just using a little bit there, here and there, and the lower bits of the canopy to kind of like tease your eye down the page and create that yummy texture and the lovely layers there, and just having fun with this bit. It's looking beautiful, and I'm really pleased with how it's turning out. Focus on the moon itself. Again, I will be actually trying to blend the round circles of the sky against the darker layers of the sky. And what I'm doing here is just using a bit of white gouache for now. Because I was actually filming this overhead and I was a bit conscious of my head hitting the camera, I didn't quite get a round moon to begin with, so I had to play around with this. But if you're actually doing this yourself and you don't have to worry about cameras and things knocking on your head, you can obviously be able to see this a little bit more clearly than I can right now, and you can create a much smoother and rounder moon. The moon's not round anyway, but you know, let's pretend it is. So here what I'm doing is just at this moment here is using white gouache, but what I want to do is also sort of create a little bit of a ring around the moon, and just have that sort of like a slightly lighter, darker colour. So I'm using a little bit of yellow now, mixing that with the gouache, and what I want to do is create a little bit of a circle within this moon circle that I've just done here, and to create a bit more of a realistic kind of like light that goes round here. So as you see, I'm going slightly very delicately here. I hadn't quite let the white gouache dry, but that was intentional because I wanted to blend both the colours together, so it wasn't just clear that I've used a different shade. So as you can see, I'm just blending the white gouache with the slightly yellow tones of the outer circle of the moon. want to try and do is create a little bit of a rainfall. And the paint that I just held up to the camera was a slightly off-white, very watered down paint. So I used a slightly bit of blue and I mixed that with the white paint, and I want to sort of create a kind of rainfall down there. And this is a bit of hit and miss because I haven't really done this before, but I'm using my finest of brushes, excuse me, and I'm creating that kind of rain effect. Now straight away I knew that that was too thick. I wasn't quite happy with the depth of the white that was coming through there, so I slightly watered down the painting. And what I'm doing here is I'm just creating a bit more of a kind of like free fall of rain there, and I'm keeping it random, so I'm using long and short strokes there. What I will do is soon correct those two very strong pieces of rainfall that was there. I will actually correct those in a moment, but right now I'm just trying to get a feel for the raindrops. Again, I'm painting this with the camera that's overhead, so I'm not really focusing on the straight lines, and you can see some of the rain is slightly off. However, there could easily have been a bit of wind. Now here, I allowed too much water on my brush before actually drying that off, so that's why it created a slight pooling effect there. And what my intention was is to wet the white raindrops that I had created earlier and take those off, so you can actually see I'm blending them back through to the blue paint underneath. Excuse me. So here I wasn't very happy with the raindrops that I had created, so later on I will be actually changing those up. Again, a few more slight mistakes that I've made there, and that's just having a slightly bit too much water on the brush, so it is worthwhile to get into the practice of drying your brushes off to avoid overloading them with the water. So again, what I'm trying to do here is just blend this through, try and save the work. Hadn't quite worked, so I don't know if you can actually see on the camera, there's a clear differential to the layers that I've painted previously. And what I tried to do here is sort of kind of like blend that through again. This is sadly it didn't work, and you will see later that I've decided to paint it over the raindrops again and continue with what I was doing before. And that's the beauty of using gouache. So if you do actually make any mistakes, you can actually easily correct them. You can probably correct the mistakes with gouache. It's easier to correct that with watercolour. Of course, you can still correct mistakes with watercolour, and if you love watercolour, we'll be doing some tutorials on watercolour soon. Sky dry, as you noticed, I had a slightly darker blue to the night sky, and I don't know if you can see on camera, but you can still see the rings slightly around the moon there, so it gives that lovely depth. When on reflection, when I was looking through at the painting, once that layer of blue dried, I realised it wasn't quite as deep for me, and I prefer to have a nice deep sky. But obviously, you know, each to his own. If you want to have a slightly morning look or slightly grayer sky, you can actually play around with those. Again, the beauty of gouache is you can actually add layers to there. So as you may have noticed, I'm using a off-white paint here with my very finest brush, and I'm creating different lengths of raindrops here. Did make a few mistakes, as you may have noticed. but we corrected those. Very easy to correct. With this paint, with these brushes, what you want to do is use as little as possible, and don't overload your brush with water, because as you may have noticed, I made a few mistakes and I created a few little puddles. But we're all on a learning curve, and making mistakes is all part of the journey. Knowing how to correct them is even more important. So we corrected those mistakes. And again, I'm slightly off centre here because I'm conscious that I don't want to knock the camera with my head. So I'm not quite sure on the angle of the reins, but what I wanted to do is slightly have the rein at an angle to create the illusion that there is actually a bit of wind pushing the rein slightly to the left. So at this stage I was actually very happy with the result that I had. So I'm just removing this tape, and as you may have noticed in the beginning, I layer my tapes to kind of protect the pages below the painting. I'm a bit of a messy painter, so every now and again I will actually catch the edges of the other pages, and I wanted to try and avoid that, so I've added a bit of tape here, and I also added another layer of tape that overlapped, but I can actually bring down to protect the other pages. So removing the gouache, quite happy with the results there. I'm loving the texture of the leaves and the moonlight there, and as you could probably see now, the paint's dried slightly. You can see the layers of the rings around the moon, and you can actually see the different contrast of the moon. It's a slightly yellowy tone compared to the rest of the moon. Now, on reflection of looking at this, I felt that even though I tried to create a different lengths of raindrops, I felt it was slightly still a little bit more uniformed. So what I'm doing now is mixing together very watery off-white paint, and again I'm conscious that I don't want to overfill my brush, but it's very light here. So what you want to try and do is use as little paint as possible, enough to create a lovely flow, but not so much to create a bit of a pool on your painting and ruining and you having to start again. If that does happen, just blot it off, let it dry, and you can add another layer to blend it all through. So I'm using the very finest of brushes that I can use, and I'm kind of like decided to use the raindrops that I'm now adding are the very fine kind of rain. So I'm using very small brush marks there. Don't know if you can actually see that on the camera, but once the painting has dried, it actually is a bit more, it pops up a little bit more on the camera. So again, I'm quite happy with the final result there. It looked a bit more realistic, but again, if you choose not to add raindrops there, or add a slightly more thicker raindrops with the droplets on the end, you know, feel free. It's your painting. Do whatever you wish to it. I'd love to see the results if you actually choose to do something. And you can create a bit more of a cartoony effect, so you can actually create a little bit of shadow on the rain if you choose to use the droplets. You can pretend it's behind a window. You can create the raindrops against the window, and that would be absolutely beautiful. So I'm almost complete here, and so what I'm actually doing is going through the raindrops that I've already created and just adding slightly smaller, so it also creates that depth of rain as well. So it's a really thick, heavy rain that I'm trying to create there, the kind of rain that you love to have when you're at home, all snug and the rain is falling against your window. And I don't know about you, but I find that absolutely wonderful and relaxing. So here we are completing the final result. Really pleased. I'm hoping you can see on camera the texture of the rain, as well as the texture of the leaves of the tree and the way the moon hits those leaves, and there's lots of yummy different layers there. I've let the paint dry and I'm really pleased with this. So you can also see the rain that's in the distance and the rain that's slightly closer up to the foreground there. Again, the yummy texture of the leaves I just absolutely love, and hopefully you can also see the rings of the moon. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please join again, please comment and please share your work. Thanks again. Goodbye.